55, I'm like an ancient dinosaur compared to what they know. See, so I grew up thinking opioids was heroin, and heroin was shot by drug dealers into the arm, and they died. Well, it's completely different right now. My son was a sophomore at University of Colorado, doing great at school, no indication of anything going on, and one pill that he took happened to be a Chinese fentanyl-laced Xanax, which was not a legal Xanax, it was a street Xanax. Like many other young people on college campuses across the country, every single day, he took one, and I've coined a phrase, one pill can kill, and that was his story. Yeah, it's sad.
You know, it's funny, my wife, and when I say funny, I don't mean laugh funny.
Yeah.
My wife reminded me that when my father was suffering with cancer, he was wearing a fentanyl patch. I didn't really remember that. I was his caretaker, but I was more the, emotional son taking care of his dying father. And I remember that. I said, yeah, he was. And we were talking about how fentanyl, in its proper doses for, let's say, dying cancer patients, he had pancreatic cancer, is different than what we're talking about here, because I constantly circle back to the constitutional argument that this is not for the government to get involved in, that there's no mention of drug laws, but we're not talking about beer and wine. We're not talking about people smoking a little bit of grass. We're talking about something that reminds me of the drug in the movie Alien Nation or RoboCop 3, right? I mean, how many futuristic sci-fi films have been made where there's some drug that's got a measurable portion of the population so hooked they can't get off?
Yeah, so fentanyl, let's start with that. That's how strong this stuff is. This is actually something along the lines of 100 times stronger than morphine and heroin. Fentanyl, when used in proper doses, I guess is a massive pain reliever. I lost a sister and a father to pancreatic cancer, and there's quite a bit of pain associated with that. And so there was fentanyl there. Here's the issue, though. If you take the U.S. penny, a penny weighs about 3 grams. If you take the same amount of fentanyl, 3 grams in a penny, you could kill a room full, over 1,000 people to be dead from overdosing on fentanyl. That's just the weight of a penny. So it really has to be measured and taken seriously. So when you talk about laws, you have to have a very stringent FDA. You have to have a very stringent oversight. People watching, making sure that this stuff is being used in proper proportion. The problem is when most of the world's fentanyl is produced in China. It gets produced in these meth lab type places. It's sent over here, such small quantities. They can hide it in the U.S. mail. They can walk it right across the border. Such small quantities can be so strong in the form of bigger and higher dosed highs for people who are users. But the problem is when it gets mixed with a little too much fentanyl, they're dying. My son passed away on September 8th, 2017, the same night that there's a military, I believe he was an admiral in the Navy, whose son, 19-year-old, also died the same day of a fentanyl overdose in Denver, Colorado, which is about 20 miles from Boulder, Colorado, and they're believing it was the same batch. So there are these bad batches of pills that are coming that are literally deadly. Now, Andrew, the worst part of this is people who are addicted, who are using this stuff, say, oh, that dealer who people died from, that dealer has really strong stuff, so he'll actually get more business from a death, of an overdose death. So it's really messed up out there. I'm a free market person. I'm a libertarian who says that the war on drugs is not working. But when you have something so deadly, you absolutely have to regulate it.
So here's the question. How much, and we talked about this at CPAC, how much of the flow of this, because Mexico, it's weird. Mexico has very lax prescription laws. And it seems, when we talked about this, that this stuff is being made in China. It's being brought to Mexico. I mean, if you're a drug cartel, why are you going to hump, big bushels of marijuana across the border when all you got to do is stuff a bag of pills or powder in somebody's pants and have them run across the border and process it on the other side? That there is an immigration and border control issue that we have to deal with here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm in favor of the border wall, and I think any fentanyl you stop, or any of these very high potency drugs you stop, you'll save lives. There was a bust of a bag of fentanyl. It's about one of those large Ziploc-sized bags of fentanyl. And there was enough fentanyl in that bag that they caught at the border, enough fentanyl in that bag to kill the entire population of New York City, some 4 billion people. One bag. So any of these we stop, we're going to stop some of these deaths. Now, think of the massive numbers. Fentanyl alone, forget opioid overdoses or overdoses in general in America, which are about 64,000 a year, 475 a day persons. Fentanyl alone was responsible for 20,000 of all the overdoses in America. 20,000. That means you pull fentanyl off the market, you stop the flow, you're going to save enough lives to turn the life expectancy of Americans back up. If you realize, I mean, they're actually blaming opioids for the recent downturn in the life expectancy of Americans. For the first time in nearly 100 years, we're living shorter lives because of, and they're pointing the finger at opioids.
So you told me that the president has been consulting you personally on this,
yeah.
and that he gave you whatever measure of comfort, which is there's no such thing as actual comfort when you lose a family member, especially when I said to you at CPAC, we're not supposed to outlive our children, right? I mean, that's just not supposed to happen. But when you're talking to the president, what is this something that is state, local, federal law enforcement? I mean, the drug dealers that are on the streets selling this stuff. I mean, what is he going to do in sanctuary cities where they don't even want to deport some of these guys when they get caught?
So the president has called me several times. My wife and I are just completely devastated and heartbroken over our law. It was, by the way, Chase was our only child, not only our only son, but our only child. So we're really, really hurting. And he's called several times, and I realize that he has some empathy for the situation. So he invited me to the White House. We sat down on several occasions, just the two of us in the Oval Office, and we talked about what's going on. We talked about Eric, but we also talked about what's happening. And he does care. He cares because it's ripping families apart. It's really kind of pinpointed at the younger generations too, who matter and who matter a lot. So he's very, very in tune to what's going on. He's put together an opioid summit on March 1st, it was. And he invited me there, and we did this video where I talked about the story, and it was one of the hardest things probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. So my video's on this government website. Andrew, it's got 25 million views already. I mean, it's people are very, very concerned, but the president as well. So the opioid summit had 9 cabinet secretaries and heads of departments. The head of the FDA was there, Homeland Security was there, HHS secretary was there. Veterans, all the secretaries were there, and they are promising to fight the opioid epidemic in America because the president cares about it. He told them to. He directed them to take this seriously and start fixing this problem. He doesn't want to see more than 64,000 next year. I think 17 will end up having to be a big number as well. 16 to 64,000. It may continue to rise for a little bit, but if he's true to what he's saying he's doing at the cabinet level, I think the number should start to come back down to numbers that are better. But I got to tell you, one family going through what we go through is just horrendous. We got to stop it. We got to put an end to it.
Is there any information? I mean, I'm assuming that maybe out of this would come a DEA ICE task force. Do we know how much of it's produced in the United States versus being illegally imported?
So it's an interesting point, and the Trump administration is focused on the illegal stuff, right? Busting drug dealers, putting them away for longer times, catching people at the border. That's the illegal distribution of opioids. There are a lot of people dying from the legal distribution of opioids. For example, Joe Manchin, Senator in West Virginia, talks about a town in his state where 1,000 people live in the town and 9 million pills legally were delivered to that town. That means Big Pharma is selling them into pharmacies and into distributors who are ending up in these hotspots around the country. Ohio's one of them, West Virginia's another one, where a ton of pills are going in and then are being distributed illegally throughout the system. So they go from legally produced to illegally distributed. Now, some are doctors who are just writing prescriptions like crazy because they want to, make the money on the office visit, or they got to deal with a pharmaceutical distributor. So that's the legal end that needs to be loophole that needs to be tied down as well. I hope to push both sides of this, the supply and the demand also. He really hasn't, and President Trump is doing a lot, but they really haven't focused too much on the demand side of it, which means my job to tell parents to get out there and talk to your kids, let them know how dangerous this is, have the conversation, remove the stigma of opioids. Well, Andrew, you started this conversation off with, my wife will be mad if I tell you this, but we got to stop that. We got to say, opioids have touched almost if you talk to 5 people on the street, I guarantee you at least 3, maybe 4 of them have a friend or family member who's either died from an opioid overdose or is worried about someone. So it's no longer should be stigmatized. It's like anything else. It's like a disease that we need to really crack down on. The good news is this disease is curable. We just need to educate on one side and stop the illegal stuff on the other.
You brought up shooting heroin earlier. Do you remember the old pill commercials? We're not candy.
I remember. Here's your brain on drugs.
There was a commercial I remember as a kid. It was a singing pill, and it went, "We're not candy." That when you say heroin shooting, that freaks a lot of people out, right? Like you have to take a needle and put it into your own arm, or you've got to sit there with a spoon and cook something down. I mean, that's enough to scare off most people. But if you're looking for a cheap high, and like you said back at CPAC, we're talking about what, $3 for a hit?
Yeah.
And you just gotta
cheapest high in the street, Andrew.
And you just put it in your mouth.
Cocaine.
And you just put it in your mouth. You don't have to stick something in your arm. You don't even have to smoke it. We're talking about something so cheap and so easy and so addictive and so deadly that I could see why. I could see why that, maybe, like I said, cooking something down, putting a tourniquet on your arm, putting a rubber hose on your arm and tapping a vein. I mean, that's something that would scare away, I would say, the majority of people who are unlikely to take a drug like that. But when someone says, "Here, put this in your mouth," you're talking about something that seems innocent.
Come on, these young kids can stick a pill in their pocket and not have to worry about parents, finding weed in their pocket or a cop finding something in their cards. It's buried somewhere in their pocket. The other thing is there's a drug recently called Opana. This is a very, very strong opioid, and young kids they were crushing it into a powder and snorting it, and they were dying because it hit their blood system all at once, real fast, and they were dying left and right. And so the drug company who produced it, I can't remember the name of the farm that produced it, decided to make it so hard that they couldn't break it into a powder, and they were still doing it. They're still finding ways to crush it down, and finally there's a group pushing to get that drug pulled, and they may have finally got that drug completely pulled off the market because of its misuse. That's an important step. I mean, if we can start to look at fentanyl in the same way now, a lot of people are saying, "I need fentanyl to survive." I don't want people I don't want people to blame me if they have to go through life with pain. It's not our fault. It's just when young people are abusing a drug, we need to find another way. There's got to be another way to fix this problem.
So what here, and I don't know if you've had any discussion or if the administration has actually sat down, and I'm assuming that pharmaceutical CEOs are involved here. What is being said by the pharmaceutical CEOs who are producing some of this legally in this country? Are they saying it's
not enough, Andrew? You're hitting on something very important. A couple of weeks ago, Purdue Pharmaceutical decided they were going to cut their sales force for OxyContin, a very strong opioid. They were going to cut their sales force down in half, and I think we may have talked about this at CPAC, but everyone said, "Oh, that's great, Purdue, you're doing a great job. You're cutting your sales force in half." And my point is then, and my point remains, what the hell does Purdue Pharmaceutical have a sales force for OxyContin in the first place for? Why are you selling more drugs to doctors than they may need to prescribe? Let them tell you what they need. You shouldn't be selling them. And by the way, when you sell them, what are you offering them? You're offering a doctor a golf trip or something? Are you offering doctors some sort of discount if they sell more, or if they prescribe more OxyContin? How about this? Let's put a shine a real bright light on who's prescribing what, who's being sent what, which pharmaceuticals are sending how many pills to where. And I think a lot of that will clean itself up. Unfortunately, Andrew, it won't happen until there's a massive lawsuit filed by somebody. My guess, remember Big Tobacco? There's probably going to be a big pharma lawsuit, class action lawsuit against them, and they're going to end up paying a hell of a lot of money, and then they'll probably, tie up their ways.
That's one thing that's got to be reformed, and I'm only using myself. My mom worked in a doctor's office, and the way she described the pharmaceutical reps was like timeshare people, like car salesmen. Like they come into the office, and if you ever worked in music radio, it's the same thing with record reps. They will do anything to get you to buy more of their product. That like you said, if it's taking the whole staff out to dinner, if it's like you said, a golf trip, or I got some tickets to this, or what do you want to buy more of this and prescribe more of it, right? Because if you're meeting with a pharmaceutical rep, their goal is to get you to prescribe their product more. That's the bottom line. I'm not deriding anybody who works as a pharmaceutical rep, but the incentive there up until this moment was to say, how do we get this doctor to prescribe our product more often?
Yeah, that's a problem. That is a problem, especially when some of these pharmaceuticals have a patent on the actual product, so they generally don't have any competition anyway. So why are you prescribing more? You're going to force doctors, or at least push, literally using that word, push doctors to maybe prescribe more than they need to prescribe. I was doing a radio show the other night, and several people called in. This is one, but several people called in saying, I take 7 or 10 pills per day, and I have a 30-day supply. And I just sat there and go, wait a minute, so you have up to 300 pills ready at your avail to sit in your medicine cabinet? Do your kids know this? Do they have access to this stuff? Do you lock it up? And most of them don't. I mean, this is part of the problem. They as horrible as it seems, and I'm a libertarian, but for God's sake, when something is deadly, I think there is some sort of line that you need to draw between something that can kill you and smoking marijuana in your free time that's never going to kill you.
Eric Bolling is joining us. So it looks like the strategy here is to stop the stuff coming into the border, working with state and local law enforcement to go after the dealers who are pushing this on the young people, and to get the pharmaceutical industry to willingly adopt a new standard for the way their representatives work with doctors who are ultimately the front line of how this stuff is prescribed legally, right? That sounds like the three-pronged strategy here. You stop it at the border.
Add in there, Andrew, not my child syndrome. Make sure parents talk to the kids. On the demand side, make sure parents are talking to kids, make them understand one pill can kill, and that there's no stigma attached to a son or a daughter that has an opioid issue or is worried about an opioid issue. I can't tell you how many people have called me and said, I had the captain of the baseball team, or my daughter was a straight A student, and they're dead, and it's because they didn't have that conversation. They didn't stay involved in their kids' lives, thinking my kid's too smart, my kid's too athletic, or my kid's too good, or my kid's too young, for that matter. It doesn't matter. Have the talk. It's not the stigma it used to be. We need to remove that stigma too. So that's really the demand side I think we need to talk about as well.
So the 5 things: parents need to give up on not my kid. We have to remove the stigma of people admitting they have a problem if they have a problem. We have to stop it at the border. Law enforcement has to crack down on the street-level dealers, and the pharmaceutical industry has to adopt reform standards before they find themselves facing regulation.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot, but think of it as 64,000 people died last year of it. Why not? If 64,000 people died of something in the water or something in the food system, we'd be falling over ourselves trying to figure out what it is and solve it fast. And it would be solved fast. So there's a lot to do, but we'll save lives. I mean, we will save lives. And I can just tell you from experience, being a father of a child who overdosed on an opioid is a hell I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. It's just god awful, and if we can just save a few families from this, we'll have done our job.
Well, I'm going to be optimistic for you here. I don't think it's that difficult. I think if we get border security right, we stop the flow of the illegal drugs. If we stop it with the political correctness at the local level and start cracking down on these street dealers and stop referring to them as like some kind of social victims, right? We treat the drug dealers as what they are. They're drug dealers. They're breaking the law. They're selling things illegally. If parents, are serious about saying, hey, it could be my kid, and I'm not going to pretend it can't be. If we say to people, you know what, if you've fallen down, we're going to help you get back up. And if the industry recognizes that they can look at it 2 ways. They can either face that giant class action lawsuit, or they can get their standards reformed in a way that's not pushing what they know to be dangerous through the local doctor's office. I don't see that as a Herculean task. I think if we, again, all of these can be done. We're already talking about border control. We're already talking about going after the drug cartels. We already have law enforcement in place. They know who the bad guys in their community are. They have to be able to make the arrests, and parents have to be serious that this is not, this is not an extreme situation. Like I said, tying off and inserting, somebody could be getting, you said, one pill can kill. Parents have to be serious. We have to remove the stigma for people admitting they have the problem, and the industry has to say to themselves, hey, you know what? If we don't want to be on the receiving end of a class action lawsuit, we're going to go ahead and design a new program so our pharmaceutical reps aren't incentivized to push this stuff through doctors.
I got to tell you, that is probably the best summary of what it's going to take to really put a fight up against the opioid crisis that I've heard, and I've been doing this for a couple of months right now. I love that, and Andrew, honestly, if you and I should just get out there at some point and talk about this to a wider audience, to your radio audience, but also maybe a stage somewhere, because I think hearing that message that you just put together very eloquently is what it's going to take. On both ends, both the pharmaceuticals, law enforcement, and then also on the personal responsibility, parents and kids side too. So, man, that was really good.
Well, thank you. Look, and I got to be honest with you. I look forward to the day when you and I can talk more about stocks and taxes and all the stuff we used to do on your old Fox Business show. Because I mean, that's the stuff I would rather be talking about with you, Eric Bolling. Not this, but this is what we have to do now, and it's unfortunate. And maybe if those 5 things are done, we'll solve the problem.
Yeah, well, certainly fight it, and maybe work towards solving it. That's great. I'm glad we had this chat.
All right, Eric, I'll speak to you next time. You're doing great work.
Yes, sir. You too, Andrew.
Thank you. 1-866-95-PATRIOT, 957-2874.